I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a return trip by the man that wrote this very popular book, The Fruits of Graft. The subtitle is The Great Depression, Then and Now. He is an expert on the Federal Reserve. He also knows a lot about the deep state, the globalist, because, you know, the Federal Reserve's kind of an arm of that. And so we have Wayne Jett back on. You actually have argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. You've won a case up there. I think you've also didn't get a win on one of your other cases. Wayne Jett, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Oh, happy to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me. Glad to be back with your audience. They're great people.
I want to start with your the repo market. I mean, we're hearing one record high after another. Nobody brings up the hundreds of billions of dollars being pumped out in the repo market. John Williams says he thinks they've lost control of the market. They wouldn't be doing that if they didn't. What's going on with the repo market, and why doesn't anybody want to talk about it?
Well, I think the repo flood of liquidity is being used. It could very well be, I don't know this for a certainty. I don't have inside sources, but the thought has occurred to me that the repo is being used as a tool to help nudge actual interest rates a little lower. In other words, they're manipulating the market again. They don't like the way markets act by themselves. And so the Fed, using Keynesian thinking, we can make the market do anything we want. And so it's very possible, with all of the strategies, tactics they have available, that it may have even been the White House that talked them into nudging interest rates lower in the marketplace by using the repo thing, because they definitely are taking up parts of the market that otherwise would have to go to private credit sources in order to fund activities, especially the kind of rampant speculative activities that are not real business. Lots of activities in the speculative areas, derivatives and things of that sort, that the big banks are doing, and it causes a need for liquidity, and they want their interest rates interest costs to be as low as possible. So yes, they're flooding it that way, but that's not the only thing going on. I tend to think that certainly the tactics of the White House, as I've said before, are to right now prolong the appearance of prosperity before doing a reset of the monetary system and actually inaugurating a time of sound money. We certainly don't have that now, and we're seeing it with all sorts of crazy circumstances in the markets. It's not just the repos any longer. There is additional talk about how, for example, such things as large denomination currency being printed in great amounts by the Fed and then promptly disappearing from location or ability for the Fed to know where the money is.
What's up with that?
Why would that be happening?
Exactly. Why would that be happening?
Well,
I mean,
I'll give you a theory that I've got. It's just something that occurred to me. Well, why would somebody prefer, I mean, when they have when they own that much money, why would they rather have it in a safe than have it on a digital account? Well, it seems to me one possibility is that there may be talks going on about a monetary reset, and it could be that people with their funds in an electronic account will have a lower call on assets from, say, the federal government.
Wait,
those who
hold on a minute. You mean
have cash available.
So in other words, if you have cash, you get paid more for the physical cash than the digital dollars in your account.
Well, certainly the digital dollars in your account can disappear much more quickly than if you can present documents in the nature of a Federal Reserve note, which is what they're printing presently. That's happened in the past. It's happened by quite a number of accounts in recent years when other countries, other nations have brought to the U.S. Treasury very large denominations in bonds issued by the U.S. government, have been making claims against those. Well, perhaps that has something to do with why the Fed is printing so much. They're talking about in the trillions of dollars in large denomination currency, and that then very promptly they can't tell where that currency is any longer. Well, somebody's put it in a safe. So I can only speculate about what's going on, but there are a number of mysteries of that kind. That's why it seems to me that with the Federal Reserve, that your primary challenge is to get it in the right context of what, whose purposes it serves and how you relate to it. And of course, I've said many times previously, the Federal Reserve is an outpost of an international power. I call it the global cabal or the kingmakers cabal. It is effectively owned and operated by that cabal, owned and operated through the banks of Wall Street, which the cabal is the primary owner and controller, and then through the Federal Reserve is actually more a tool of those Wall Street banks than the other way around. And to add insult to injury of that circumstance, as of the year 2010, when the Dodd-Frank bill passed, of all things, the Federal Reserve was put in charge as the chief and only regulator of the Wall Street banks and all banks. So we have a tool of the Wall Street banks, namely the Federal Reserve, who is the chief and only regulator of the Wall Street banks, as well as other banks in the U.S. And so in that circumstance, what could possibly go wrong? Obviously, everything could go wrong, including, for example, since 2010, what have we seen the big banks doing? First, we heard about hundreds of trillions of dollars in interest rate derivatives as liabilities for the big banks. Now, in more recent days, we've heard again about another type of liabilities, again in the tens and hundreds of trillions of dollars for the Wall Street banks, in the nature of what you might call assumption of business risk. You can call it derivatives or an insurance contract or whatever you want, but apparently a number of the very big Wall Street banks, not just the Wall Street banks, but I guess you could call Deutsche Bank a Wall Street bank as well. It's certainly over here. It just happens to be a German bank.
Yep.
And yes, the reports are that those banks have been accepting contracts with other business partners in which those business partners are paying a premium to the banks, so-called, in order to offload their business risk onto the banks. And the banks are taking those premium costs and I suppose costing them out, so they have plenty of profit in there. But it is something that certainly gives the big banks major amounts of income on a current basis. But what happens if those business risks go wrong? Well, let's just look at that overall situation. Both in the interest rate derivatives and in this business risk insurance business that the big banks now have, what the big banks are doing is essentially, now that Glass-Steagall is a remnant of the past, there is no protective wall to shield this kind of business risk the big banks are taking from the deposits of ordinary depositors. So bank funds deposited into the bank are not protected accounts belonging to the customers of the bank. They are simply working capital being put at risk by these business ventures that the big banks are engaging in. So when you say what could possibly go wrong when the Fed, a tool of the big banks of Wall Street, is put in charge as their only regulator, this is exactly the kind of thing that can go wrong. The hundreds of trillions of dollars in exposure, first to interest rate derivatives, and now the same kind of exposure to insurance of business risk kind of things. All of that putting into danger the deposits of bank depositors, which, of course, any one of those banks going down would completely wipe out the FDIC and create a tremendous loss and crisis for the population of America as a whole. Now, that seems to me to be a setup by the deep state, by the ruling elite, the ruling cabal, to make the populace of America this supposed victim of this, and therefore arrange some kind of additional bailout for when they pull this thing off again, whether it's true or false that they've incurred these great losses because of their exposure on those things. But this is the reason that I would like to make the point for those people. I detect this point of view around the country that, oh my goodness, we can't possibly consider such a wild concept as to not have the Fed anymore. What would we do? Well, they just don't have it in proper concept that the Federal Reserve is a privately owned enemy of the American people as well as others around the world, and that they are not our savior. It's not good to keep them around. We ought to shovel them into the ground as quickly as possible, replace them as quickly as possible, and be done with it. So the kind of mourning by what we might call the mainstream news sources or something or other, and the continued treating of the Fed as a champion of the people, it's just so far off base that it really is important to get this historical context of where they came from and what they've been doing to us for the last century. It has been very possibly the worst century yet in terms of the middle class, the people who are able to support themselves and their families.
Let's go back.
That's what we're talking about. For productive people, the Federal Reserve has been a complete unmitigated disaster.
Let's go back to the printing of the money. They're printing these
Yes.
trillions of dollars. I know Mnuchin said we can't find 1.5 trillion. That was one of the things he was reported not a week ago. So you're saying that the cabal is hoarding $100 bills, so they cannot be erased.
Well,
in a reset.
Well, that is
that's your theory.
Readily say that's my theory. But somebody is doing that. It may not be the cabal itself, because they have bigger fish to fry. But people around the country or the ones who are tuned in to the inside of the Fed and the big banks might be doing this themselves in order to make sure that they are positioned better in case of a capital reset, which has been talked about for a number of years now. But I'm quite certain we're getting close to it. Whether we can do it in an election year, I can't say. My guess is the politicians, maybe even the ones calling the shots, would rather not doing this coming year, but it's certainly a possibility. And when you have these strange things happening, you got to try to explain them some way.
You said that in one of your reports that there's an anti-Trump fear. What does that mean? I've long thought that the crazy things that Pelosi and Adam Schiff are doing, and Nadler and whoever, the whole Democrat Party, the Ukraine, the kickbacks, really Giuliani is coming out with the, that our people in our embassies were part of the kickback scheme, part of the corruption, part of the all that. What do you suppose is a lot of then on the other side, there's a lot of people say, oh, nobody's ever going to go to jail. Well, somebody thinks they're going to go to jail. Somebody's worried. Do you think somebody is worried? Do you think the deep state, the cabal, is worried? And why?
Oh, of course. They have been worried because there is, in effect, a grand strategy, I'm convinced of it, to take them down and to remove them from this country and the world. I mean, they had, in my opinion, there's every reason to believe, historically, that they had in mind the conclusion of their plans to eliminate the middle class and with it most of humanity. That has been their clearly expressed intention in the English language since at least 1901. So there's been no doubt about that, and they have been proceeding on it ever since that basis with a continuation of wars of every kind, starting diseases, all sorts of mechanisms for accomplishing those purposes. And frankly, I've said before, 2016, I think, was just about to bring in the closer on us when we, I believe, not just America, but the rest of the world has largely been given a breath of a chance to undo these people I think there is a comprehensive plan underway presently to wipe out the global cabal, to uproot it so that it can't come back, and to destroy the institutions that they've set up in the last 100 years. This is when everything has been done to really put into practice. The network of central banks was an essential cornerstone of the plan to destroy the middle class. So the Federal Reserve and the other central banks that have been set up during the 20th century, it's time for them to be destroyed. I think they're going to be. And as we go forward here, I think we have a turning point coming the last month of this year, last few days, and then in 2020, I think very likely you're not going to see the President of the United States playing rope-a-dope any longer. I think you're going to see him go from defense onto offense in a number of different respects. But in one respect, there has been a very large amount of legal work done to investigate and to begin prosecution of a very large number of highly placed people as well as their underlings. And we're going to start seeing that in spades in 2020. You're going to see a president that's not just on the ropes with a so-called phony impeachment. You're going to see what it's like when somebody goes on offense, starts punching back, and the criminals start having to face the justice that they have so richly earned all these previous years, and including now. The crimes have certainly not ended, and they're going all out to try to make sure that somehow the crimes they've committed in the past do not come to light. I mean, of all things, to impeach a president for inquiring into bribery done by a previous administration with other countries, and even involving U.S. funds given to the other countries. This is something that it would just be hard to make up, to go to the extent that the mainstream media, the fake news, has gone in order to create the idea that the president is the problem because he inquired into a multi-million, probably is going to go way up from that, even just in the Ukraine,
billion,
in terms of past crimes by high officials of the United States government. I think the great majority of Americans are already latching onto this understanding, and they're not going to let go of it. So I'm optimistic about what the next year's coming, and I think what is coming next year is most certainly not a conviction on impeachment of the existing president.
Is this why they're acting so absolutely cuckoo? I mean, the real problem was the crime in the Ukraine, the bribes, the selling of the office, the family members put in all these different board ships. I mean, this was happened, and then the media covered it up. I mean, this is absolutely outrageous. Is this why we're seeing such crazy antics by the mainstream media, which are co-conspirators, and the Democrats, who are the front for the deep state and the cabal?
Well, yes, I think it's clear, it's certainly clear in my mind that that's the case. And the media, in large part, is controlled. They're captive organizations. It's not just individuals that are saying what they're told because of their rich salaries. Those big media organizations are captured, and
they're
have
lying.
been. The so-called Mockingbird media was not just a name chosen at random. There was an Operation Mockingbird, as I think most Americans know, that involved media control in other countries, but certainly it's been the case here. And it's very much in evidence now, very much more so than ever before, that these organizations are way out on a limb, and they're willing to say and do just about anything. At this point, they're even trying to keep their own audience, and they can't do that. So times have come to a historic point. America is changing dramatically, and we're just about to recover with a great deal more technology within our reach than we've ever had before. But we're about, I think, to recover the concepts of the Constitution that were practically being openly laughed at by the Speaker of the House within the last year and 18 months. Even before this came down to a point of their attempt to impeach, they were actually laughing at people thinking that they were entitled to freedom to own firearms, for example, or freedom of speech, saying whatever they want and not having these so-called safe areas where you can't speak about certain subjects, whatever the ones with the biggest muscle and the most violent attitudes would insist that others not say. This is something that really goes to the heart of the capability of any nation, including America, to survive and to exist, as opposed simply to collapse into the arms of and the control of the shadow governments and be folded into a global dictatorship that I feel quite certain that a great number of Americans are not going to allow to happen. So I'm feeling very upbeat about it and confident. Yes, it is a dangerous time in many respects, but it is the time of the greatest opportunity by far in my lifetime to have a chance at actually confronting and overturning these people. I have no doubt that our present leadership is intent upon doing that, and in fact is in the process of doing it.
And you think that the legal, you think I mean, you're a lawyer, argue cases for the Supreme Court. You think the case in the House of Representatives is total scam? Total
of course
scam.
It is.
And they are desperate. They don't have any other better offense than this complete desperate Hail Mary pass. Is that why? Is that what you're saying, that this is a desperate Hail Mary pass?
Well, they have the things that have really not come to the public view yet, and in full view, are the horrendous crimes that these people have been committing. We're not just talking about billions in money stolen by our highest officials of our government, former officials. we're talking about crimes against humanity that boggle the mind, and many people do not shrink from using biblical terms to describe just how evil this is and has been for years. And I think all of that is to be addressed. And if we can do that ahead of the time that our children or their children have to confront it, then by all means, I say let it come in 2020, and let it come in the years, the months and days until we have met and overcome this tremendous thing that has been done to so much of humanity. And much of it has been done in our lifetimes, under the name many times of doing the right thing and protecting America and so forth and so on. And it has been done actually for evil purposes by bad people. I say this in the historical understanding that the Great Depression was imposed by a president of the United States with the help of the previous president before him to get it started, at least rolling over for it, if not worse. But FDR imposed the Great Depression to starve to death as many Americans as possible, and was regarded by historical evidence as the most highly empowered political operative ever for the global cabal, the ones that rule the world and have for centuries, not just centuries, for millennia. And so, yes, this is a time being talked about as no other that I've ever heard of in my lifetime. And I believe we are at a crux of a time right now that we're going to see solutions that we could only have dreamed of even 10 years ago. I mean, that's how significant this is, and we need to take the best care of the efforts being made to challenge these evil forces that are being taken on our behalf right now. It's a great thing for the world and for America. I can't tell you how many people I've heard from other countries saying, we're so much for what you are doing, for what President Trump is doing. Keep it up. So I'm sure you've heard much of the same thing.
How bad is it going to get? How dicey can this get for the common person? And when is the common person going to wake up and say, oh, wow, football's not so important? I mean, when is the common person going to see, oh my gosh, we have a full-blown battle going on right now? And how bad is it going to get?
I think how bad it's going to get will probably come in a rush. Surprises at times. It may well be that the ruling elite will try some means of causing a great crisis short of the monetary reset. They certainly have created all kinds of attacks, violence, and so forth to try to upset populations all around the world. But it's hard for me to say how completely effective we can be in shutting off their resources that allow them to cause great tragedy to many people. But I think that the planning is very likely well along, that we can do the capital reset, the monetary reset, efficiently enough so that the downtime and the confusion and the chaos of not knowing how we can get food and supplies and so forth, I think it can be minimized, and the great majority of Americans and others around the world will be saved from the problem, as opposed to the kind of cataclysm that, if left to their own resources and capabilities, the ruling elite have been absolutely dead set on doing for at least the last century and more.
And you think
Now,
that the reset is not going to be able to wait till 2021? You think the monetary reset, which do we get a new dollar with this monetary reset? Do we get a new currency? And what happens to people's savings in the bank? Let's start there. Do we get a new currency?
well, I
Number
think
one.
there are a lot of calls on those things. I'm quite sure that there will be a new currency in the nature of gold-backed dollars, or whatever our currency will be. I think it'll still be called dollars, and I think it will be gold-backed. I believe that at least I feel relatively confident that actions have been taken to recover and restore to the U.S. Gold assets that have been stolen, have been pilfered, have been taken in various ways over the past century. And in that circumstance, we would be able to go to a gold-backed currency if we can generally rebalance our current account. That's what I've discussed with you previously. The trade imbalance, I think we're making real progress on it. The early agreement made with China, the first phase, is going to be very important in making that closer to balance. And that's what needs to be done before we make the change in our currency reset. So I hope that's going to be something that I would prefer, I think, to see it put off into 2021, if possible. But those that are desperate, according to the events that are likely going to happen and bringing them to justice, they may be desperate enough to try to force a currency reset on us, or a financial crisis that will cause it to be done in the year 2020 as opposed to 2021.
Do you think this is part of the reason why this Governor Northam is trying to take people's guns in Virginia? Is that a trial balloon by the deep state evil weasels to try to see if they can disarm people?
Well, I think it's the kind of thing that indicates what the entire national plan would have been in 2016 if the election had gone the other way. They just happen to have another state fall within their grasp. It's a pitiful thing that it's Virginia, one of the real leaders in helping to establish our constitutional rights that we still depend upon, that our opposition is openly laughing and scoffing at. Before they got put in the pincher movement that has come to pass since 2016, they were openly making comments that our Constitution was a relic of the past. They would never recommend it to any other country. These are the same people now that are supposedly impeaching the president, who endangers them for the purpose of protecting our Constitution. That's the same Speaker of the House that was openly laughing at items of the Bill of Rights that people were trying to claim, and thinking she was treating them as if they were practically lunatics for thinking that we still have such a thing as rights, that the government can't do what it wants. That is as plain speaking as I can be about it. But we are at a really historic point in history, and I'm hopeful about it. I'm optimistic. At the time my book came out in 2011, it was impossible to project that this is the kind of opportunity we were going to have within a space of 10 years from the time it was published. 2011, we're well short of that. And so it couldn't have come at a more propitious and absolutely essential time that the 26th election was the turning point of all elections that I experienced in my life.
2016 election.
2016, yes.
Does Obama go down?
That's the time at which.
Go ahead. The 2016, that's the time at which. Go ahead.
Well, the 2016 establishment presidents have been elected in every election of both parties in my lifetime. I have to say that about President Kennedy. In my mind, he was definitely an establishment elected president. He came from a family closely allied with them. The Kennedy family was closely allied with FDR. And yet, within his presidency, he reconsidered and considered the moral judgments that he had to make in light of what he had learned as president as to the reality, and started making moves directly against the global cabal, the kingmakers that owned the banks and owned the Federal Reserve and control it. And they shot him to death in plain daylight, and have still been able to cover up the truth of the matter, except most people have been able to find it in the back alleys of press reports as compared to the major media. President Reagan was in somewhat the same circumstance. He went along with giving them the vice president they demanded in order to get his election, but promptly showed that he wasn't going to cooperate, and they shot him within about 3 months after he took office. So this is the kind of thing that from that time on, there has been no one that was not an establishment president until clearly, there's no doubt in my mind, I still get really poorly informed statements that the so-called orange man is a tool of the establishment. Absolutely not. We would not have had any of these experiences we've had since his election if that were true. And people need to be much better attuned to what our real history has been than to exhibit such ill information as to think that we have a president now who is establishment. It's not the case.
Does Obama go down, and does he squeal on the Rothschilds or the Pacers or the Rockefellers? Does Obama go down, and does he squeal?
My guess is he'll talk, but how far up it goes, I'm not so sure how far up he goes. He was an agency operative, and largely still was during the time of his presidency, in my opinion. And in those circumstances, I do not rank him nearly as highly at all in the global rulers as was, for example, Franklin Roosevelt back in the 30s.
But you think
he was not one who was given his head. He was following orders in most cases, I believe.
And you think this is the year big fireworks go off with the Patriots versus the cabal?
I do believe that. Either we're going to be successful and it will happen, or in adverse circumstances, they will be making their move before 2020 is out, is my opinion.
So you think fireworks go off 2020? Either they're going to be forced to have a crisis. They're going to force the reset. They're going to force it up. We're going to have big consternation and big problems in 2020. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying, to be clear about it, I believe the president is already ready for them, and I believe they will be the president's offensive against them will be going forward by 2020, and certainly ahead of the election. These operatives that have been after him are going to be closer to justice, we'll put it that way, before the presidential election comes along in 2020. We're going to see much more offense, while primarily the president has been building our economic position, building our ability to actually go to sound currency. And in that circumstance, he can rid us of the cabal's fake currency that is robbing us blind. That currency is going to be valueless, and they will make it that way if they can before he goes to a new currency. So I hope he's going to be in a position to do that, and I tend to think that will be the case.
Wayne Jett, the popular, very popular book. I just have the cover art here. It is the Fruits of Graft. You can go to classicalcapital.com. Is that right? Classicalcapital.com.
That's right. And I might just mention very briefly that it's been given 7 stars as the highest rating given to any book by Robert David Steele.
Very excellent.
And he ranks at number 6 among the top 50 that he calls transformative, life-changing books. And it's only because I've been able to capture the history and to get it into print for the first time that Americans lived through during the 20th century, as well as the rest of the world.
Wayne Jett, that's on the...
I thank you.
Go ahead.
I thank you for the chance to mention it. I would consider it a great honor. I didn't think I could expect any such honor as that when beginning the book. But by the time I had done my research and found how important that history was, how importantly different it is from what we've been taught our whole lives, it's absolutely necessary to know about it in order to have a worldview that is anything close to realistic. So thank you for letting me mention it.
And the website, classicalcapital.com, is that correct?
Yes, and it's only $25 for the hardback, and free shipping within the U.S., special postage rates for those outside the U.S.
And that is on the front and center page of your website, because I went on there just before this interview, and people can easily take a look at it. You're the one that will be shipping the book, and it's your book. It's a fantastic book, and you're a fantastic guest. Booked you at the right time, Wayne Jett. Booked you at the absolute right time to tell people that, there's big gamesmanship and overt and covert war going to be happening for the control of America.
I believe that's the case, and I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my views with others.
Wayne Jett, he's an attorney, a very established, distinguished attorney, argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. He has the very popular book, which you can find on the website. Wayne Jett, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks for having me.